Hi everybody. Earlier this year, I came across a YouTube video about a unique tomahawk that was designed to be everyday carried as a tool and self-defense weapon. I found that it was made by a company called Wingard Wearables, and they offered a whole line of unique, historically inspired tomahawks. Today we have the very special privilege of having a conversation with the owner of Wingard Wearables and creator of these tomahawks. Zach Wingard is a well of resources about the shape, usage, and history of tomahawks. He is the founder and owner of Wingard Wearables that makes these tomahawks, as well as a variety of other unique and useful EDC tools and weapons. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation about Zach's tomahawks, weapons, 18th century warfare, and his future plans for Wingard Wearables. So let's go ahead and start the discussion. So Zach, what crazy idea? What first inspired you to have this crazy idea of EDC tomahawks? Because we normally think of tomahawks as these big weapons that we can really do a lot of damage with, and kind of something that we wear in our belt for historical reenactment or bushcrafting and woodcraft. What gave you the idea and the inspiration to make tomahawks, make them to where you can carry them around all the time?
Thank you for having me on. And yeah, that started back in, we'll say 2007. I started working at a location that did not allow the carry of handguns or knives over a certain blade length. So I was always focused on being as capable as possible. I conceal carry handguns, and I was big into knives of all kinds ever since I was a little kid. I had a bayonet collection and all that stuff. But, I was in a work environment where I was in a state where I had my permit to carry, but I could not carry to and from work. And there were, sketchy places you had to go through running errands and stuff along the way. So I was like, well, if I can't carry a handgun, or even a knife of noteworthy size, like what did people do back in the day when they didn't have access to a firearm? Well, I thought about, back in the day when you had your flintlock musket, the vast majority of the time it could not fire. Like you fired it once, you hopefully incapacitated the target.
Boom.
Yeah, exactly. You hoped your flintlock ignition didn't screw up, right? You hope the whole, we'll just call it's unreliable compared to technology today, right?
Yes, definitely.
So even if it worked and you fired once and you could miss your target, you could hit your target and fail to incapacitate, you could have this big man or beast on you, and you have basically a club in your hand. That's it, right? Because the firearm, there's just no hope of getting it reloaded, especially with a muzzle-loaded rifle in a practical time before an animal or a person is on you and closes that distance. So I thought, gee, what'd they do back then? Well, I remember my parents letting me watch Last of the Mohicans at far too young of an age, and I'm very impressed with Magua. Remember Magua?
Yeah.
Man, that was a man with a plan. He was like winning the whole way till the very end. Till was it Chinaguk had the war club?
Chingachgook has the
atomic
gunstock war club.
Absurdly, like I think they made that prop out of pine wood, and you could still see it was so heavy he couldn't even move it around well on camera as a prop. But yeah, we'll get into war clubs in a little bit, right? But
Yes.
Magua, man, his spike tomahawk, oh, that was so awesome. So in 2007, I'm like, man, I would like to carry a tomahawk if I can't carry a handgun, because when weapon laws were written back in the starting in like Civil War era and afterwards, all these states started writing these really obnoxious laws, right, banning us from carrying various things. Well, they were based on the crimes that were common of the day. Like, so in the 1860s, that's why you see like things like banned that are called slungshots or slingshots. There's like a weight on the end of a strap that criminals really use as an expedient weapon to knock people out. But almost every state did not ban tomahawks. Only Texas was the exception, because back in the 1860s, Texas was still fighting the Comanche. The Comanche like their tomahawks, among other things. So Texas had a law, their weapon laws, where they were the only state out of 50 states in the union that explicitly banned tomahawks from carry. And they've since repealed that law in 2019. Very good.
Yes, sir. And
So,
we can carry anything we want now.
yeah, so I sell a lot of tomahawks to Texas. They're probably my number one or number two state we sell to. And so California is like probably up there, because you can't carry a handgun in many places in California. They're in a similar circumstance that I was back in '07, where it's like, gosh, I have a permit, I can't legally carry, so I'm gonna make this tomahawk thing work. And there is a fellow who's still like active in the everyday carry blade combatives community, Phil Elmore, I think is how his last name is pronounced. But back in 2007, he had a little article where he showed a concealed carry rig for a tomahawk. Now, there was this company called American Tomahawk Company. It actually started during the Vietnam War in Pennsylvania. A U.S. postal employee started making tomahawks in a small business and selling them to Vietnam soldiers. Well, after the war ended, he stopped. Well, when the war on terror kicked off, other people were like, let's bring your Vietnam tomahawk design and modernize it for the war on terror. So they had this tomahawk, spike tomahawk, that was like 8 inches from spike tip to chopping edge. It had a synthetic handle. It weighed about a pound. It was actually kind of sluggish in the hand, but still, I was really focused on putting a tomahawk on me. And Phil Elmore had this article where he showed he got this custom Kydex sheath made by Survival Sheath Systems. And so I bought that tomahawk, got that sheath made. It had nylon webbing that went between your shoulders, had this big rigid piece of Kydex. So I bought that tomahawk, sent it off for them to make a custom Kydex rig for it. I even wanted to carry a dagger on the other side, even though I couldn't carry a dagger legally anywhere. I was, last of the Mohicans, you had to have.
Yeah, you got to have the knife tomahawk.
You got dual wield, right? Because that's how the movies showed it, right? That must be how it was done, right? How little I knew. But anyway, I was carrying that tomahawk underarm. It was very uncomfortable because you had that 8-inch wide head, and it had Kydex with rivets surrounding it. So now you're talking like better part of 9 inches, like a one piece of rigid Kydex under your arm, with the nylon biting into my skin. And so I had to wear under my baggy shirt a wife beater, right? Which is I lived in Alabama at the time, very Alabama man here. I had the wife beater on, had the tomahawk under the button-up shirt, and I could reach under and grab the handle and pull it. And with this tremendous Kydex noise, it would clack open, and it just, boom, I would have a tomahawk in my hands. And it felt awesome doing that. I was doing that all the time. It was like a lot of force to pop it back in. It was extremely uncomfortable to wear this thing. But I felt awesome carrying it, because that capability that it gets you, maximum lethality at maximum reach. Like if you got a tomahawk, right, that chopping edge all the way extended out, just boom, it's lights out. So I was like doing that all the time, drawing it, practicing quick draw. And one time I drew it and it felt funny. And I was like, that didn't feel right. And I had raked the sharpened beard through my love handle, and there was this like expanding blood stain on the wife beater. And so I had raked that beard, because you were drawing it, that you're grabbing the handle and you're pulling it out. And so that beard, there's this swath where the beard and the spike and stuff could potentially intersect your body. Now, I had drawn this thing 100+ times, right? And I injured myself one of those times, right? So that to me showed me that method of carry, underarm, one-piece sheath, pulling it out and popping it out, that increases the probability of self-injury, which is a no-go, right?
Yeah, you want it to be no times out of 100.
Exactly. And thankfully, my back hair covers the scar. You can't see it, But yeah, it raped me, it bit me. And I'm like, all right, this isn't going to work, right? And it was uncomfortable anyway. And it was especially uncomfortable when you're cutting through your flabby tinder bits, right? So I was like, man, I'm going to set this tomahawk thing, everyday carry tomahawk thing aside. And I stuck with like tactical fixed blades and folders and stuff. The folders especially were really, I guess they're still hot, right? Folding knives,
Yeah.
one hand opening and stuff. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I moved from Alabama to Pennsylvania, well, Delaware and Pennsylvania. And again, I was in a situation where it was like, I was in some areas, higher crime areas. It was like, okay, I still can't carry a pistol for various day job related restrictions and errands, and living in states that didn't have reciprocity with Pennsylvania. Like I'm on the border with Delaware and Maryland, and it's like, well, what do you do? And so in 2016, I was like, I'm going to tackle this everyday carry tomahawk for me, just for me to have it. And so I did lots of hand sketches. I had the book by, let's see, I was really into this book at the time, Dwight.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that book.
Yeah, I have both volumes of those, and there are ideas that I was interested in at the time that I've since gone away from. But anyway, I did a real deep dive into it. I was modifying cold steel tomahawks. That's how I came across your video on YouTube algorithm. You had modified a cold steel tomahawk, but I was doing that sort of thing, just trying to figure out how to make a tomahawk truly lightweight and easy to carry. And at the time, I reached out to Jack Vargo. He wrote the book on spike tomahawks. It was missing some technical information, and I contacted him, and that started, a few years of mentorship, like probably from 2016 to 2020. He passed away in 2020, but he mentored me about historic spike tomahawks. He was an archaeologist, and he also made historic reproductions of spike tomahawks off of museum originals. And so he really knew a whole lot. It was a huge wealth of knowledge, and it really opened my eyes to how lightweight and compact tomahawks really were historically compared to what's on the market today. And I realized, like, I really did have to, I couldn't even remove enough weight and metal off of these cold steel tomahawks to get them near the lightness and thinness of these historic tomahawks. So that's when I started doing a deep dive on getting mine, instead of modifying a cold steel tomahawk, getting a version of my design, my concept made, and it wound up being the back ripper tomahawk. So
yeah, that's the first model that I saw of yours that I was like, oh my goodness, it's so amazing.
Oh, thank you. So this is a 16-inch handle, right? And it's got a downward curved spike, and that spike isn't just curved downward, it's also curved to the side.
And that's to go around your back, right?
That's to conform to your hip, right? Because you wear this inside the waistband. The handle is along your leg, inside your pant leg, right? And it moves. The carry system is a two-piece. Let me show you on a different one. It's another time. It's a two-piece Kydex construction with a piece of shot cord that keeps them together, and these clamps that tether it into your pant waistline. So this is in your pants, and it pivots with your body because it's not one rigid piece of Kydex. So you have this up against your hip, you're walking, you're squatting, you're rolling on the ground, you're doing, pelvic thrusting or whatever, it's moving with you, right? It's pivoted. But then when you grab it, when these are tethered against your body with these clamps, it results in a clean release of the Kydex. The blade covers come off and you're ready to go. And, I had a theory with the spike tomahawks and how they might have been used. And I really thought they were the best option for a tomahawk for combatives, for self-defense, because you can chop and then transition to that hook to tear down, or if someone's in grappling range, that sort of thing. So that's how it started. And I did hand drawings. I did CAD models, some mechanical engineering background. So I did got 3D printed plastic components, and discovered that I needed to do things like cant the head down so your beer gut doesn't run into it when you squat, and had to cant the hook and that sort of thing. It was lots of iterations. And then I worked with a blacksmith to get hand forged prototypes. And when we finally got it in hand, it looked so beautiful. We were like, well, I think other people will want this. It's not just for me anymore. Now it's like, well, what if other people want this and, would buy it? Then it's like, the wife and I were like, might want to consider pursuing it as a small business. So in 2016, we got serious about it, and branched out into other tomahawk designs and other tool designs like spike-based tools and things, and then launched the business in 2018. And that's the story, how it started.
That is a fantastic story, and what I really love about it is it's so organic, and it goes from you figuring out a need that you have to figuring out, oh, this might be, you do so good with it that you find out that this might be something that other people would enjoy having and have as an EDC option. Do you find that you're using your tomahawks much for just tool use, or is it just generally primarily as they were used in the 18th century as a weapon?
Oh, definitely tool utility use. So this tomahawk here, it was this specific back ripper. I made this one in 2018. It was from our first production batch, not a prototype. I've been carrying this every day. The only times I don't carry it is if it's a really hot day. I carry the shorter version, the shorter handled version. Or if I'm at the beach, I carry the Empress tomahawk because it's bronze and won't rust, right? But yeah, I use this for utility all the time. You can choke up on it and use it for like box, like cutter type, short knife utility. I've used the rear spike is sharpened on the inside to a knife-like edge, so you can use that for like clearing weeds and stuff. Like
that's cool. I hadn't
gardening.
thought of that.
So it's like a
Did
sickle.
you use it like a little sickle or a scythe or something?
Yeah, because it gathers what it cuts. So if you got like an ornamental bunch of grass that's overgrown, right? Those are tough and fibrous. Sometimes weed whackers don't even handle them well. Well, you just get in there and rake it, and you're catching that material and you're cutting it. The sides of the heads of all our spike tomahawks are flat, so you can use these as percussive impacts. So if you got crack open a walnut or whatever, or even if driving a tent stake, you could do that. So it's not to say that this does everything. Like a knife is clearly more optimized for many cutting tasks. A hammer is more optimized for many hammering tasks. But this, which weighs under 8 ounces, so less than your smartphone, can do a whole lot. Even the bottom of this, you see how that's flat. We live in a rural area where there's lots of bugs that get in your house. I squish so many bugs with this thing. Because it's hard hickory, and some of these bugs are tough. Like people got, these little soft bugs. No, in the country you get big, tough bugs.
The big ones,
Yeah, like try stomping on a tick that crawled into your house. No way. You got to put that hard hickory on it. I've even swatted, I'm not making this up, I've used this to swat wasp out of the air because the fly swatter isn't going to cut it. When it's that light and nimble, you can do it. See how fast it is. This is a blur, right? Because this thing weighs less than most knives, right? Yet it's this long. It's 16 inches, right? You got maximum reach. You can hook and drag things. Like dragging dead wood into your campfire, that sort of thing. So it's just really handy every day. If you got packages with like those big straps holding them, this can lever in there and pop. So, thankfully, I haven't had to bury this into someone's head once, in self-defense, right? Because that's thankfully a very rare thing. And most of our customers use them in utility. I would estimate about 1% use them in self-defense because it's thankfully a rare thing to happen. But in most of those situations, when you draw a tomahawk, right, the criminal predator element,
oh my goodness,
from you, gets the hell away, right? Now, some of our other tools we make that are smaller, like small spike-based tools, we found that the customers that use those in self-defense almost always have to stick those into the opponent's body because they're so small. Like if you draw something like this, a thin piece of metal, like it's not intimidating, it's not visually obvious, right? You're not gonna like brandish this thing around. Small blades, small spikes, they are felt, not seen, right? You gotta, unfortunately, inflict pain to get someone to get the message. So, but with tomahawks and with, war clubs, things of just such large, like no one's expecting you to pull that out of your pants, right? No one's expecting you to pull out from under your shirt, this thing, which is like our latest tomahawk, which, has all kinds of ways to put a hurt on somebody, but is also very good in utility, right? So all of our tools, with the exception of probably the Empress is very optimized for flesh and bone and doesn't do as well in utility because it's bronze and it's a spontoon tomahawk. But most of our products have built-in utility, common lawful purposes beyond self-defense, right? So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Do you have any anecdotes from any of your customers of them using using one of your tomahawks in a self-defense situation, be it
Yeah,
just brandishing it or actually having
yeah.
to
So
use
the
it on
most
someone's
recent
body?
one was a guy in rural Missouri. There was a road rage incident where he had a guy following him home, and he was like, "Well, what do I do?" Right. Well, he had the Stingray tomahawk, right? He pulled into the dead end road that was his home was at, didn't pull it from his house because why would you do that? That's telling the person where you're at, right?
Yep.
But he got out, the person got out with I think he had like a type of pickaxe type tool on him. And then when he saw that this guy had a pretty intimidating, wicked looking tomahawk, he got back in his car and pulled off and left. And it's like, okay, thankfully no blood had to be shed. But self-defense situation is very complicated. There are, I am not a fan of a brandishing. Like there's different philosophies, right? It's sort of like if you deploy the tool, you're intending to use it, right?
Exactly.
It's kind of my philosophy. But if you look at nature, gosh, how many animal conflicts are there between animals that, of course, are way tougher than we are? Like animals are outside naked 365 days a year eating raw food. Like no human is going to do that, right? Yet, what do most violent conflicts are like it with animals like brandishing? Kind of, they're showing off how big they are, how tough they are.
Getting big, getting strong, showing your antlers, showing your teeth.
There's all this almost it's I wouldn't call it traditional because animals don't have tradition, but clearly Mother Nature errs on the side of brandishing because that probably increases your odds of survival in the long term.
Definitely.
So if you're buying into having a tool that looks intimidating enough to brandish, well, a small folding knife or EDC fixed blade, or really as much as I love my spike tools, these are small, right? So they're very useful, but they don't have that like, holy crap, I'm street smart enough to realize I need to get out of here, right? And so thankfully that's mostly been the case for self-defense with our tomahawks.
Well, I'm glad to know that your creations have made a difference in people's lives. That's really fantastic.
Thank you.
Do you are there any of your customers who are military or special forces? Because I know there's some special forces guys who use the Winkler Spike Hawks. Is there anybody in special forces who use yours?
So our first year we started in 2018. It was a weird coincidence, but I wound up being in a conference for the day job where I was next to a guy who was in Canadian Special Forces, and I'm friendly Alabamian by nature, and he's a friendly Canadian, and so we went out for lunch. Afterwards, because like no one knew anybody there. You're sitting in this big room, but I'm like, hey, you want to grab lunch this place? I saw they sort of good Peruvian chicken over here. So we go, we're walking, talking. I asked him if, you guys ever use blades and combatives and stuff. And he told me about stuff. And he said, yeah, our units like ceremonial like weapon is a spiked tomahawk, like a wood handle spiked tomahawk. I had never brought up what I was doing. I had a back ripper tomahawk in my pants. It was like,
oh, you mean like this?
I was like, well, I didn't do that in the street because it was like in Northern Virginia. You don't want to do that, even if it's legal. Cops are going to whatever. But when we got back, I'm like, hey, I got something to show you. So I showed it to him. He was like, wow. So they ordered 4 of them, right?
Wow.
But it was definitely ceremonial. When you talk to guys that like the Winkler tomahawks, for instance, it is primarily ceremonial. Like when you think about it, they've actually had guys get in trouble. This is stuff that's actually been in the news, right? Where they've used a tomahawk in combatives, like one instance, and they didn't have to. It was like, I'm gonna be more badass, right? So I'm gonna get my hatchet kill. Well, then the commander is like, okay, we train you how much? How much is on the line with this mission? And you had this many other tools that had lower risk, right? And why did you do that? So there's definitely that kind of aspect. Like, yes, special forces, super macho, super capable and trained, but blades used in combat, it definitely happens, but is extremely rare. And often the tomahawks, like Winkler, I don't know if you're aware that they were given Winklers when they graduate or
Oh, I
join
didn't know
different
that.
squads. Yeah, so they are not purchasing them with their own money. Winkler has a donor program, and RMJ, I don't know if RMJ does that too, but basically it's like when you get in these units, you're basically getting free stuff, which you can choose to carry or keep in a mint condition and give to your offspring when they get old enough, right? Or in some cases, you pawn it for money, right? Because it's like you needed money. You didn't need this like 2-pound tomahawk. Like those tomahawks are actually quite heavy, right? So we have always focused our tomahawks for civilian application. We did, at request from soldiers, make what we call Molly compatible models. So if you look at the back ripper tomahawk, it's got this handle swell here and it's long. We slimmed down the handle some and contoured it so it will slide into Molly Pal's loops. This is the third back ripper we've made. It's very ugly. They look very nice now. I don't have any new ones because we've been sold out for months. But if you focus on the handle, it's very slim, slides through Molly Pal's loops. So we've definitely had requests for folks that want to have that as a tertiary weapon option on their plate carrier, right? But a lot of things have to go wrong for you. Like, you're basically in modern warfare, your battle plan has been all kinds of screwed if you have to go to a blade.
If you're
right?
having to go to a bladed weapon, yeah,
At
definitely.
all. Like, that's never a battle plan. And so when I've talked to and interviewed veterans of the global war on terror that have used blades in combat, the most common use would be like room clearing, and you're first guy in the room and you get tangled up with someone in the room and you can't get your weapon online, like your rifle, right? And your battle buddies haven't rushed in the room enough or don't know what the hell to do when they see this tangle, right? And that's when a blade is really good.
Yeah, that's the
because you can't
get off me blade.
yeah. And, in those instances, it's like they were issued or purchased on their own, like what we would call a field knife, like a big bellied single edged knife. And in both instances, when I interviewed people, those knives actually had a hard time getting to the vital region of the body.
Because they were so big, thick, and heavy?
Yeah, so one of them was a cold steel SRK, and the guy had to use it against an Iraqi just wearing a cotton t-shirt. And the cold steel SRK is similar to a K-bar knife in blade width. It's about 1.25 inches. And so he wound up having to let go of his rifle and put a second hand on it to get it through the rib cage to the vitals, because when that blade is that wide, you actually need a kind of orientation to get between the ribs, right? It's not easy to just punch through the ribs like in the movies or something. And so that's one of the reasons when we interviewed people, we came out with this type of tool, which is intended for soldiers' use. This is our DICKPIC Magnum, which is a hammer, a pry bar, and a big spike. And that can
How long
easily
is that?
slide through the ribs. This is about 12.5 inches. And it has a carry system. This is kind of like a medieval dagger, but with a hammer pry bar capability.
Yeah, it looks like a rondelle.
Yeah, exactly. And so that will slide through Molly Pal's loops, or it can be, go through a belt, or you can attach, an aftermarket carry clip. But this was sort of our soldier solution here, is you pull that out and it can either find the gaps, like if you're against a opponent that isn't wearing body armor, that'll easily punch through to the vitals. If they are wearing body armor, you got to target the gaps. Like in medieval times, you had to aim for well, here's a big gap.
Eyes, here, under the arms.
Yeah, and actually the modern IOTV, like for catching fragments, actually has a neck guard on it. So even a fixed blade,
Wow.
So you got, layered Kevlar, which is very difficult to cut through. It's even difficult to stab through. And then you got ceramic plates, and you have all this equipment. You have a helmet of either layered ceramic or ultra high molecular weight polyethylene that can
Mm-hmm.
stop some rifle rounds. You're not stabbing through these things with hand force, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, this DICKPIC Magnum tool is inspired by those medieval daggers, but you can't just hand us a dagger to a soldier, because daggers are almost useless in their utility, right? Especially the spike-like daggers that
Mm-hmm.
eventually they evolved into for like getting through the visor holes and the knights and the
Mm-hmm.
chain mail and stuff like that. You're basically issuing someone a barely sharpened spike with like a big bulbous handle to get your grip in when you're wearing
Mm-hmm.
gauntlets. Well, with this, we want a spike that could be used in utility, like hand drilling, hammering, prying, and like a dagger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of our soldier solution there. I don't think tomahawks make as much sense for a soldier wearing body armor facing another soldier wearing body armor. You aren't going to breach the helmet, right? You aren't going to breach anything here. It's just, there's no hope, right, for a tomahawk or a chopping weapon to get through. That's where we see things like daggers being more relevant for like a modern soldier. And this can be carried in civilian aspects like that. You can slide this inside the waistband, but
Mm-hmm.
that's our tool that we've marketed the most for
I
the
might need
soldier.
to get one of those for my toolbox.
Yeah, no,
Mm-hmm.
we definitely want it geared for utility. But it's
Mm-hmm.
like, if a thruster point-based weapon is essentially a spike that's very
Mm-hmm.
potent, you can add more features to the spike. So a more modest size, like full-size DICKPIC, this is about 6.5 inches long, hammer face, pry bar, spike, grip it different ways, that sort of thing. Very handy for everyday utility tasks. But yeah, if you got to poke somebody, you poke them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we've gone off the rails here. We're talking about tomahawks, I think.
No,
What?
this
Yeah.
has all been fantastic. I wanted to interview you and I wanted to talk to you because you just have such a wide range of weaponry and expertise. And one thing that I find is so interesting is we're coming around to some of the same solutions that people were coming up with 500-600 years ago.
Oh
Like
yeah.
body armor went away for a few hundred years. We now have it, and now we're having to have specific tools to potentially deal with the threat of body armor, because we like you said, you can't hardly stab through Kevlar. You can't. Maybe
Mhm.
unless you jump, like put the spike on him
Yeah.
and then jump on the spike.
Certainly
So
not with ceramic and magazines
Mhm.
on them.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a modern kit loadout and you've got 6 or 8 magazines on your chest, you're not stabbing through that
No.
with a spike, much less a tomahawk.
Yeah, and I think edged weapons are also one of those things for soldiers now. Like they don't issue bayonets anymore. They're more likely,
Mm-hmm.
the Army is more likely to issue a suppressor for the end of your rifle than a bayonet.
Yeah,
And
probably a lot more
so,
useful.
oh yeah, but edged weapons now have become something that, starting in the global war on terror, that you could personally choose to carry. So it's now one of the only weapons a US soldier gets to choose to show,
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, I am bringing this into battle. Everything else is like government issued, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the type of edged weapon you take says something about you. And
Mm-hmm.
there is sort of that bias of like, because my granddad fought in World War II and was trained with knife fighting combatives back then. The solution that worked then when you were fighting in the tropics with people wearing very little clothing does not work now, where someone is wearing from head to toe armor to stop fragments and even rifle rounds, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
working
Mm-hmm.
with tiny gaps. It's like you're saying, like 600 years ago, they kind of had the solution, but you can't hand someone a big fancy rondel dagger and be like, yeah, we're going to add this to your kit, right? Because it's like, hey, I would kind of, if I'm going to pay for that penalty and weight, I'd kind of like to be able to like hammer and pry stuff and
It
like
needs to be
hand drill
multi-use. It's got
things.
to be worth
Yeah,
that weight.
yeah, because like how often are you going to get into tanglements where you gotta use it like a dagger?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully never. Like that's again where the battle plan went wrong, right? Where you
Mm-hmm.
turn the corner and someone was there where they shouldn't be, and you can't bring your ballistic weapon to bear.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's where we're going. We're always branching out. Like I was originally, I was a big fan of spike tomahawks, but I originally didn't get spikes as everyday carry tools. I thought like, oh, you're just carrying that like an ice pick. Like, what is that going to get you? Like, I would always carry a knife over that. But I learned when we started studying the spike as a product line, as a design, that they're actually like your finger. They're like super fingers. Like this here, this is a spike my wife designed. It's curled, right? We call this the quill. And it was her idea to give the ladies something they could just carry on behind their ear or in their pocket, right, as a self-defense tool. And so these are hand forged into sort of a pyramidal cross section, right? And it's very ergonomic for gripping in different ways in self-defense, but it's just handy for, like, cleaning your nails, or like opening like a beer, or, scribing, tearing open packages, prying, percussively tamping down paint can lids, all these things that would break your folding pocket knife. A little spike, which doesn't weigh much, this weighs an ounce, it can do so many things that normally it would damage a folding pocket knife. Everyone carries pocket knives, right? But they're delicate in a way. Even a tough, combat tactical like folder, you're not going to use that for like prying open a paint can lid, at least not for long, before you break the tip.
Yeah.
So
I actually, this is actually the second cold steel Raja 2 I've had, and I broke my first one batoning, and it broke right at the crucial point right there. So it's, there's a lot of knives. These modern folding knives, they're really fantastic, but they're really not meant for combat. You're absolutely right, and this is probably one of the only folding knives that I would actually trust in combat, because I've heard of situations like you mentioned earlier with almost cutting your finger off, but I feel so comfortable with this one, and the amount of damage what you can do with a pocket knife of this size is just terrible.
I've seen those videos, like denim with like layered denim on pork, and it's just like effortless. It's amazing.
Well, I'll tell you this. Back several years, well, this is more than several years ago, I shot a doe, and before I went to go field dress it, we had it hang up by the back legs, and I just on a whim pulled out my knife and went to go slash at its neck, and it cut the deer's head off in one swipe with this thing.
Wow.
And I didn't even put a lot of effort into it. I just went right for it, and it went through like nothing was even there. So
cold steel, that was like Lynn Thompson would have loved it if you had filmed.
Oh, I'm sure. But I know if I'd have filmed it, I wouldn't have gotten it through in one shot.
Yeah, that's true.
I know something would have gone wrong.
Yeah. or you would have like if you would have like made a weird noise or something, but excited noise. Yeah. It's like, oh. Yeah, batoning, that's interesting, because like back in the 18th century, they didn't baton with knives. The knives were like really thin. And slicey, like scalping knives and stuff. And so I've looked more, we came up with our first knife was it last year, the love handle, right? So this is our take on like the scalping knife, right? But it's probably thick enough to baton with, because this is 3/16 thick.
Oh, that's definitely thick enough to baton with.
But I'd rather you use something else that's like thicker, right? That's just my opinion. Like this here, this spike, it's like 3/8 thick. You can put that in and baton with that to pry open. Or our Sparrowhawk, right? I mean, this thing is over a 1/2 inch thick.
Yeah, that looks like it would be a great woods tool right there.
Absolutely, it batons all kinds of ways. You can even baton it this way to like use this end to do fine like tasks. But like, I'd much rather something much stouter be used than a knife. But that's just kind of my bias, because you've been around, you've seen like in the late 90s, I guess, was when the batoning really seemed to take off, and it does demand that the spine thickness goes up, and so that does make for like a less slicey knife. I mean, that's just how the angles work, right? And so it's not that I'm opposed to it, because in a way this is thick enough spine to do that with, but we wanted a thicker spine for like thrusting and that sort of thing as well. But I feel like the closer you get to a knife that's kind of also a pry bar, the more you're getting away from what a knife is supposed to be. That's just
Yeah,
my opinion, and it
yeah,
could change.
I feel the same way. I was actually at the what was it, the NRA show here in Dallas back a few months ago, and I was over at the Tops Knives booth, and I was looking at all their knives, and I'm like, what would you even use most of this stuff for? Because like you said, they're just sharpened pry bars. I mean,
Yeah.
the angle, the edge of the angle on them is so, it's so wide. I don't know what you would use
Hard to
it for
break, though.
practically. Yeah,
Hard
hard
to
to break. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not opposed to that. If for let's say you marketed a knife for throwing, it needs to be pretty.
Oh,
stiff.
absolutely. Yeah.
I would buy that. But that's also why, like, I think SE knives, like they have like almost a rant on their page against throwing their knives, right? They're like, don't throw knives, right? Hey, you let people do what they want to, right? But throwing a tomahawk, much better, right? Way more
Definitely.
right? So yeah, you know, for me, I think like I'm not anti knife throwing or knife batoning, but I haven't seen that as something that Wingard Wearables should pursue at this time. So I'm not condemning it. You do what you want with your tools, but that's kind of like, I'd want a knife to be a good slicer and piercer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think a lot of those big thick knives are made as a response to a lot of the destruction YouTube videos, because you go online and you look up just about any knife you can think of, and there will be some sort of destruction test, and the guy will have it sitting on two center blocks, and he'll hit it with the big stick, and it breaks, and it's like, well, it's not that good of a knife. It's like, well, no, duh, that's not what it's made for.
Cold Steel kind of did a little bit of that with
Yes, they did. They did.
But
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the guy. Was it Joe X? Is that the guy on YouTube that does just nothing but knife abuse? Like he'll just
I think
purposely.
I can't remember if it's him. I've seen, I think, a Russian guy. He's at least a guy with a Russian accent.
Yeah,
I've seen him
European.
do a bunch of that.
Yep. I think it was Joe X was his name. So yeah, I mean, if people want to send them knives to break, you know, it's good content. But man, a little tear comes down my eye. If one day someone has like the love handle, which is quite a difficult knife to make, right? It's freehand ground and everything, and it's not cheap, right? Man, that would break my heart to see it like broken for purposes of breaking it, right? Of course, you can break anything. I don't know.
To have one more point on our little knife discussion here, my favorite modern knives are no more than, I think they might be a little more than 1/8 of an inch thick. My favorite knife to carry around in the woods is actually a 14-inch Old Hickory butcher knife, and it's made out of 1095 high carbon steel. It's lightweight. I can carry it when I'm backpacking, and it can do everything that a small knife, basically everything a small knife can, except it's also a machete, and a really sharp one too. And my other
14-inch blade or 14-inch overall.
14-inch blade. So you're looking at carrying about 18, 19-inch full kit and caboodle. But it is a slicer. I lived in Florida for 6 years, and every time I was out in the woods, I had that with me. And I was never in a situation where that didn't help me in some way. So
yeah, in Florida, you know, if you're using it every day, rust isn't going to be a problem. Because like 1095, people are like, oh, that's going to rust. And it's like, you know, the love handle I carry on me is this is 80 CRV2 high carbon steel. And it patinas quickly when I'm like using it for meat processing. It's up against my body. If it's like a really hot summer day and I'm sweating a ton, it's possible there could be rust spots that just form because you're just using it for food processing and other things. But if you're using it every day, you're wearing it every day, it just rubs off. And you can also just, you know, clean it up, right? Because the more you use it, like for everyday tasks, like I found like carrying a big fixed blade, it just makes you more dexterous with it, and you discover different ways to use it for things. Like, you know, I wouldn't have thought reverse grip was good for table food processing, but with this curvature of a knife, it was, right? Things like that. So I mean, like you were mentioning having like a 19-inch long knife, if you carried that every day in Florida, you'd be a master at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, most people are trying to do their daily tasks with like a little knife that isn't capable of the big momentous jobs that your knife is capable of. Like they
Mm-hmm.
say,
Yeah,
the big knife can do big knife things and small knife things, right?
exactly. Yeah.
And I, you look at these tribes that are still like out there, like in South America and stuff, and what's their go-to tool? It isn't just
It's
the
a machete.
machete to get
Mm-hmm.
through. They're using it for all kinds of daily tasks. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like they get Amazon packages shipped in the Amazon, right? But still, I mean, they're using that big blade for everything. So
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I think the finest things I've used my big knife for, and I'm not a bushcraft or woodcraft master, so I haven't just spent years in the woods, but I have skinned a water moccasin with it, and I think I've carved a spoon with it.
Oh, that's pretty
So
good.
you can do some of those finer tasks
Huge
with.
spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing I found is I'm 6'2", so I'm
Mhm.
on a little bit of the taller scale. I can
Yep.
get away with carrying a lot of things, whether it's concealed carry or in the woods or something. I can get away with carrying larger weapons or larger pieces of gear that a lot of other people can't get away with.
Yeah. Now I'm 5'10" when I wake up in the morning, so I'm a sub 6 foot manlet, right? But you can still carry 16-inch tomahawk in the pants,
Hmm.
and
Hmm. Yeah, because your
some for
femur is
work
over
clubs,
16-inch.
18 inches. This can be
Wow.
worn inside your pants. Now, if you're under 5'8", you should probably get our Molly tomahawks, the shorter models. Like the shortest one we make is this guy, the Empress Molly version is under a
Yeah,
foot.
go ahead and talk to me about your Empress right there, because I've been aware of that one since I found y'all, but
So
it wasn't until I think maybe the past couple days that I was looking at it, I was like, that's actually really, really cool. So go ahead and tell me about
Well,
that.
thank you. So this was our modern take on the spontoon tomahawk. So spontoon tomahawks, the look like a dagger-like blade,
Hmm.
um, and those actually weren't sharpened. All the spontoon tomahawks you see in museums that have this big dagger-like looking blade were essentially flattened spikes, right? And I found, like in my testing, that they actually don't bind up on like flesh and bone surrogates. They extract easier, even though they got like a butter knife like edge. You
Hmm.
pop in and pop it out. So in our modern take on the spontoon tomahawk, we wanted that sort of flattened spike on the front, and it actually does come to an edge. It's shaped like a megalodon shark tooth. It's flat on one side, contoured on the other, right? So this, with very little effort, arm motion alone will bury to the handle into a flesh and bone target and pop right out, just
Hmm.
really fast. You don't want to get hung up. Um, and the downward curve here is also sharpened on this downward side, right? So you can catch and propagate a tear in combatants, right? And the hickory handle comes to this sort of chisel tip here. And this is all fire hardened and rubbed with bold linseed oil to be water resistant. But yeah, you can use that in like, fist hammer blows, right?
Hmm.
So this tomahawk here is really optimized for like flesh and bone combatives. You're using it for, burying this and extracting and hooking like a meat hook on a stick to drag and tear down an opponent, or in less lethal, like using it to intercept a punch, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, Very capable. It also throws really well, but we recommend throwing this at like a foam based target. The shape of the head will not stick into wood. And this is a quite a thin tomahawk. Like this here is about 5/8 of an inch wide. The
Oh,
eye is
wow.
about 3/8 wide and about an inch and an eighth long. So, there's not a lot of wood in the eye, right? It's plenty strong enough to hold up on like flesh and bone chopping and utility hooking and dragging. But it will not hold up to like the shock of accumulated shock you get if you throw a tomahawk into a wooden
Hmm.
target.
Hmm.
That's why we have these other tomahawk models like the Stingray, which have a lot more wood inside the eye, right, to handle that sort of thing. So, if you're using the Empress Tomahawk, this is our most popular Tomahawk model, actually, which is interesting because it's so optimized for combatives. But yeah, if you're using it, the foam target I use, I get like 2-inch thick polystyrene, tape it to a 1/2-inch masonite board, and you're ready to go. And it throws really quick. It's really nice.
And
This
that
is
one's
high
made out of
strength.
bronze, right?
Yep, high strength silicon bronze. So that's 100% rust proof. And I mean, we even char the top of the wooden wedges and the eye here and coat it with boiled linseed oil. This whole thing is very water resistant. So I carry mine tucked in my swimming trunks. If I go, we have like one of those cheap above ground pools that's like looks like a camping kit, like a tent,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes.
So I tuck that in the swimming trunks. I go to the beach, it's in the swimming trunks. You know, you can have tomahawk time anytime, right? It's even fast to chop underwater. Like we were at one of
Really?
those resorts where you got credit card points. So we spent a bunch of credit card points and they had coconut trees. And I was like, I borrowed a friend's GoPro on this trip because I was like, we're going to try to write this trip off on taxes. No, just kidding. So anyway, so
I
we
won't
had this
tell the
coconut.
IRS. You're safe
Yeah,
with me.
yeah. So, we brought a coconut underwater, and this thing was just so fast it buried into the coconut underwater. I mean, what's the density of water versus air? I mean, it's just incredible how fast this stuff is just pow. So, yeah, this is our most popular model for tomahawks, and it is beautiful. We wanted to go with shark-like aesthetics. We got this megalodon shark tooth shape head. This is kind of shaped like a shark head. Let me see if I can get it on camera left, camera right. You know, this is kind of shaped like a shark's head,
Dun,
and it's
dun,
got
dun, dun,
these
dun, dun,
gill
dun.
lines. Yeah. It has these gill lines for texture, right? For extra grip. And these are, I hand scrape all these handles and char them. Like there's lots of texture. You might be able to see here, like the rasp marks and stuff. Like you don't want a slippery wood handle. You want a lot of texture in that. So all our handles are hand rasped. We don't sand them. We hand rasp and scrape them with like a draw knife blade held at 90 degrees. And that creates a lot of texture that comes through even after the torch flame has bathed this in heat. So it's really nice. So anyway,
It is very, very
here's
beautiful. How long did you say the handle was?
the Molly version is 11.5 inches. And the full
Okay.
size version is 13 inches. And we make them in right
Okay.
and left side carry. So up camera. So this one is a right side carry version, and that's for left side carry. But yeah, that's
So
been possible.
you mentioned earlier that you had a mentor who helped you with your understanding of historical tomahawks.
Yes.
What are some of the things you learned from him about historical tomahawks that you take and apply to your modern tomahawk design?
Lightweight. That's the biggest thing. Most historic spike tomahawks average, this is head and handle, 8 to 10 ounces, the whole thing. Some of them were lighter, some of them were heavier, but 8 to 10 ounces is the sweet spot. So, or going even lighter. So this is under 8 ounces. We've made Molly back rippers that have gone below 6 ounces and still easily with arm motion alone, that concentrated chopping edge buries into like a pig head, no problem. They rarely weighed over a pound. Like our Sparrowhawk here weighs just over a pound, but it's short and compact. The other thing he taught me was about like not sanding, always scraping the wood. You want to use like a blade and like he would use a razor blade and just scrape it, the wood to create that rich texture. He also showed me like file branding. Like that was a historic technique to induce texture onto the handle. So you get a hot piece of file and you literally brand along the handle for grip. And he really showed me some of the historic examples, the sizes involved. And I did my own study. There are some good online collections that come up on auctions or on museum sites. And, they may not list all the dimensions, but they may list enough that you can then get your ruler up on the screen and do sort of ratioing to estimate, hey, how long were these spikes and chopping blades? And so, I've surveyed hundreds of designs, either from online or, in person. And, we've been able to get an idea of sort of the size and weight and sort of the design features that were battle proven. And we tried to impart that in all our products, even though they're made for the modern day. So for instance, the Stingray Tomahawk, you see how curved that chopping blade is. Most historic spike tomahawks that had blades over 2.5 inches had really curved chopping blades. And we think that's because of how lightweight they were. That curvature means it's concentrated in the chop, even if it's hitting at off angles, right? So, that's like a lesson that we learned from that. The other lesson we learned was most spike tomahawks did not have sharp spikes. They were blunt. Sometimes they even came to a chisel tip. So we've used that. So this straight spike tomahawk
I didn't know that.
like,
That's interesting.
yeah, and that's because if the spike is straight and you have the chopping blade facing forward for the chop, well, there's a handle someone could grab onto it. In grappling range, they could grab and push that up against you. Well, if it's a dull tip, I'm not saying this feels good, but it's not penetrating into my body if this was a needle sharp tip, right? Yet in the throw, and it impacts, or in the percussive blow, the blunt tip spike is going to bury under that momentum on impact. So almost every straight spike tomahawk you see in museum collections and that sort of thing, it's very rare to see them with needle sharp tips. Sometimes they'll list it as like, oh, the tip was blunted in use, but these were wrought iron. If the user wanted the tip to stay sharp, they would just get it up against a stone and reestablish a sharp tip. Like clearly they did not value a really sharp tip on a straight spike. But when the spike is downturned, it can be not only sharp tipped, but sharpened on the inside. Now, the sharpened inside edge was not a thing that you see in historic tomahawks because the spike was almost always wrought iron. It wouldn't hold an edge anyway, right? But they often did have sharper spikes when they were downturned. And again, the downturned spike is not going to percussively penetrate you, right? Now, if you do an exaggerated over the shoulder chop or exaggerated throw, then yeah, you potentially risk self-injury. But when you actually hold a lightweight tomahawk, how light it actually is, you can accelerate that to skull burying chop in like a punch in a confined space. You do not do any exaggerated over the shoulder chops when a tomahawk weighs well under a pound.
Yeah. So you were mentioning about how you don't want the spike to come back into your shoulder and how you don't want to take these big O swings. Let's transition over to talking about how we actually use these tomahawks, because I've been in martial arts for over 20 years. And what I'd love to, and I kind of have some conceptions about how I would use a tomahawk in combat. I would love to hear some of your ideas about, and your techniques and some of your principles about how you would use a tomahawk for actual combat.
So I think there's something to differentiate here. My opinion on how to fight with a tomahawk today is different from what I have seen in historic sources, right?
Interesting.
So when you look at historic accounts, like all these upstate New York counties that have these county histories and stuff, and firsthand accounts of tomahawks being used in combatives, when you read those, it becomes clear that Magua, if Magua existed, did not know Filipino martial arts. So there was virtually no evidence that a tomahawk was used in conjunction with a long knife dual wielding. So there's an absence of that in texts. So when you have a book like this by Macklemore unfortunately passed away before I could interview him. This is almost entirely dual wielded, right? Kind of like Mel Gibson from The Patriot or Magua in Last of the Mohicans when he has the final fight scene, right? I think one of the people I've consulted with before claimed he only came across one account where basically the warrior was able to intercept like a sword blow with a blade in one hand, tomahawk in the other, and that was it. We're talking hundreds of accounts, right? And maybe an account I haven't seen that I was told about where maybe someone was holding a weapon in each hand. But you look at these pictures and depictions of these Iroquois warriors, for instance, like there's a French artist who depicted many of them, and they are armed to the teeth. They've got 2 to 3 tomahawks and a war club and a knife. Sometimes they even got a musket with a bayonet on it. These guys are just got all kinds of weapons on them, and they use them a lot. And yet, no account of knife in one hand, tomahawk in the other. It appears to be viable, right? If you're skilled, like you see Filipino martial arts, that they do a lot of two-stick, and they transition from two-stick into, in some respects, people doing tomahawk in one hand, knife in the other, right? Lynn Thompson has like a cold steel fighting tomahawk thing where he advises like tomahawk in one hand, blade in the other. And I'm not crapping on that as a combative technique, but when you have a tomahawk that weighs as much and is as long and unwieldy as a cold steel tomahawk is, then yeah, it makes sense to have a blade close to you, because you have this thing that weighs over 20 ounces and it's frankly sluggish and slow. It's not nimble. Yet in context of the 1700s, right, Iroquois warriors were carrying spiked tomahawks, right? And you would read the accounts and they would either use the tomahawk in combatives or they would throw it into their opponent's skull, often at first opportunity, and then they would transition to another weapon right after the throw, usually a long knife, sometimes another tomahawk or a war club, that sort of thing. And so what I found time and time again was like, well, how come they don't need to carry that secondary knife? Like the idea of having a tomahawk and a knife in each hand is like the knife covers you in grappling range. Well, when you hold a historically accurate weighted spiked tomahawk, it is so nimble and fast, you realize that you can do rapid direction changes. Like you can feint the chop. Like you could even do a pump fake, kind of like, you know, in football, pump fake. Feint the chop, transition, hook, tear down an opponent. Or you could just chop them and extract. Or if they're in grappling range, you just, the closer they get, the more you can meat hook into them, hook the back of the knee, hook the back of the neck, tear them to the ground and finish them. And what you're reading in these historic accounts is tomahawks were thrown way more often than I had realized. When I first got into making tomahawks, you know, I did not think tomahawks were thrown that often. But in this tomahawk, the back ripper is not made for throwing. It's optimized for close quarters combatives, bushcraft utility, that sort of thing. But as I read more and more, they were thrown often at first opportunity and transitioned to another thing, like a tomahawk or a knife. So that's what eventually led us to design like the Stingray and the Sparrowhawk, you know, to optimize these things in throwing and in utility. But that was really surprising. So a lot of my thinking on tomahawks is like, you know, back in the day when they were battle-proven weapons, when people were counting on them, you know, how were they fighting with them? Because that probably has some relevance today. And when you look at Native American warriors or frontiersmen, they threw tomahawks a lot. They used them in close quarters combatives. And when they transitioned to a knife, it was usually a knife as a standalone, as either a finishing tool or as like to gather a scalp, right? Not even used in combatives. There are examples of scalping knives like of known provenance that you wouldn't want to try stabbing anyone with because they were so curved and flimsy. They were basically just a utility slicing knife. But then there are other examples of scalping knives that are like, of course you could stab someone with it, you know, really big and fierce. So to me, it opened my eyes, you know, when I started designing tomahawks, you know, I was very much into that Macklemore, like dual wielding. And he was also big into like choked up grips and like doing raking type motions. There's no accounts of that, right? There are even accounts that indicate that you couldn't always do that. Many of the historic tomahawks that had their original handles had lanyards on them, right? And there were accounts of like tribes that wouldn't throw their tomahawks at all, but would make sure they're really lashed tightly to their wrists. Well, it's like, well, you can't slide up and grab under the chopping edge that way. You've tethered yourself. Well, they didn't need to. Why? Like, they can't be fools. They don't know FMA though, right? Filipino martial arts is incredible, right? So not crapping on FMA, But it's clear that when you hold a historically weighted tomahawk, it is just so incredibly nimble that it can cover that far reach, maximum reach, and also grappling type range. And depending on the tomahawk they carried, it can also beat reach and get into range if you throw it. And so we've even seen accounts where like they would face off against somebody who had a sword, which is clearly superior in reach to a tomahawk. Well, they would just throw a tomahawk into the guy's head and it was over, right? So it was really interesting reading and discovering that tomahawks were often thrown at first opportunity and then transitioned to close quarters. And they're often used as finishing tools, even when, we think of combatives as like, oh, I'm going to like defeat my opponent in close quarters, grappling and that sort of thing. Often it was just like you had your ambush, you clacked off your muskets at close range, and then you just rushed in. And I mean, they would call them massacres. Like it was a finishing tool, which is pretty ugly. And that's way out of the realm of like, I'm in my martial arts dojo and this is how I'm going to use it. The type of warfare they did on the frontier, both, whites and Indians or Native Americans, it was what we today consider very war crimey, right? And that was the norm, was like prisoners were basically taken rarely or as slaves or to gather your booty, and whenever they could, they would use the tomahawk as their primary. So yeah, I'm not saying that's like the best way to fight with a tomahawk, but if that's the way they did it back then, would they have changed it if they took a Filipino martial arts course? I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, you know what this is, to be completely honest, a lot of this is the first time I'm hearing about it. Like I'd heard about the lanyards. I didn't think that tomahawks were thrown hardly at all. So to hear that, to hear that tomahawks were actually thrown a lot, it's really surprising to me, but it makes sense. As in a world where you can't just draw your pistol out and you've got 18 rounds in the magazine. I mean, you carry around multiple throwing implements, and then you have maybe you have a couple ones that you can actually use to get in close with. It makes complete sense in the context where you are more of that guerrilla force. Because with a regular standing army, with the Continentals, the Hessians, or of course the British, I mean, in that linear warfare, you're all fighting as a unit. And not that you're not fighting as a unit if you're in a more guerrilla type force, like in the case of the Indians or the frontiersmen, but so much more is relied on the individual person to get out there and have that individual prowess. And for that warrior to be armed to the teeth with a musket, bow and arrow, and then like a ton of weapons that he can either use at close range or throw at people, it makes complete sense. And this is one of the things I absolutely love about history, because you have the intersection of a lot of things. You have history, our preconceived notions, Hollywood, in this case, modern martial arts. And what I love about history and studying about history is you find out that what actually happened is far more interesting than our either preconceived notions or Hollywood would say.
So that's what's interesting too, because Hollywood loves, it's almost a trope, throwing the axe into somebody.
Yes.
And yet it was done like a lot. Yeah. And what I love Last of the Mohicans because I watched it as a kid, but I rewatched it as an adult, and I was like, there's not a single thrown tomahawk in this thing. What's going on? And it even had, what's his name with the huge gunstock war club?
Chingachgook.
He throws a war club. There's not a single account of a thrown war club. Like, for some reason, when that technology transition happened, you had the 1500s, 1600s, the first European contact with Native Americans, and you saw how they fought. There's like, lots of ranged combat with bow and arrow, and they're armed with war clubs, and sometimes they're even wearing wooden-based armor or cordage-based.
Yeah, didn't the Iroquois have wooden armor?
Yeah, there's even an interesting YouTube channel you might want to tag where the guy does a deep dive into it. He's up in Canada. I think he might be Mohawk. I forget which tribe he's in. But yeah, there's, the way they fought back then completely changed when Europeans showed up with firearms that could punch through the armor. With firearms that fired such high momentum projectiles that they were not deflected by twigs and things that definitely, when you have a self bow, a wooden spring with string, like the low energy of that arrow, it's going to get knocked all to
Yeah.
hell,
Yeah.
hitting twigs and stuff. And
But if you've
so,
got a 70 caliber lead ball that weighs an ounce, that's not
yeah, and it's
getting knocked
going
off
like
course.
1,500 feet a second. It's not going to
Mhm.
want to deflect, and it's going to punch through not just one person wearing their body armor. It punches through multiple people. And so there's evidence that within early 1600s to the mid 1600s, the Iroquois Confederacy like got really smart and good at trading and then conquering their enemies in the Beaver Wars and that sort of thing. And they adopted that technology and tailored it to their purposes. They didn't want the really heavy matchlock firearms. They demanded the lighter firearms, the flintlocks. I forget the names that they called them in historic texts, but they wanted the lightest, most compact, easy to carry muzzle loading firearms. And so often these oh, there's my cat in the background going nuts. Or you might be able to hear that. But often, like Europeans would get, tricked into becoming indentured servants, would work for years in horrible conditions to get cheap frontier land. They'd be dirt poor, unarmed, and then this war party would show up of Iroquois warriors that were quite wealthy because they had traded so well, and they would show up armed to the teeth. There are like historic accounts from the mid 1600s of Mohawk warriors just strolling through, like showing up, and they got a brace of pistols on their chests. They got the latest firearm technology. They got this tomahawks all over them, and it's just amazing how rapid they adopted this military technology into ambush tactics, firing at really close range, trying to get the trajectories of the balls, the musket balls to go through multiple opponents at once. You start to see a countering to that, like Rogers Rangers, right? Some of the Rangers rules of combat, we're talking about spacing the men out so one musket ball couldn't hit multiple people. Like people were just constantly trying to adapt to the technology, but it was just amazing to see how rapid they adopted it. Like by the late 1700s, no one was really using bow and arrow. The amount of battlefield accounts with bow and arrow during the Revolutionary War or even the French Indian War, you can rarely find it. Sometimes niche things are like sending messages over walls, or I've read one account where they set fire to a hut using a fire arrow, basically. But other than that, it was all firearms. They completely overhauled their weapon system. And the war club was still used in some cases, but even it got eclipsed. War clubs, I love war clubs. We've even come out with our own EDC carryable version. But when you have something that is really only good for smashing people's skulls open, right? Compared to a tomahawk that weighs less, can be used in bushcraft, can be used to break down a deer carcass, set up camp, and you could throw it at the enemy because it's so light and it'll stick into them. You can use it as a hand-to-hand weapon. I mean, it's no wonder that war clubs were, greatly reduced in their frequency of use so rapidly. So it's just really incredible to me, the Native American warriors that just took technology. They had their world thrown upside down. Horrible things happened to them, but they were able to take advantage of that European military technology and adapt it in ways that Europeans coming fresh overseas could not adapt to easily. And so it's really incredible to me. But the tactics do seem to be primarily ambush. You were talking about guerrilla warfare and like individual combatants. It's difficult to maneuver shoulder to shoulder in the reality of wooded terrain, right? You can't fight in as a unit as they trained in open terrain and apply that to the frontier. And you even have accounts from like the late 1600s of like Frenchmen writing back to other Frenchmen and telling them, like, look, don't bring this equipment with you. It will not help you. There's even an account that said, don't bother with swords. When you bring them here, like they just get in the way, and our enemies, the Iroquois, are just going to throw a hatchet through your head, right? And so it's just amazing to me how rapid they mastered this technology and were kicking butt. But numbers is a thing. That's another thing we don't have to get into. But just as amazing of warriors as they were, as skilled as they were, they had to adopt tactics to mitigate their risk. And it sounds crazy to us firing a volley of muskets and rushing into close quarters combatives and chopping your enemy down. But that was actually much lower risk compared to what they viewed the European tactics of marching shoulder to shoulder up to like
standing and shooting at each other.
Yeah, the Native Americans looked at that and they were like, "You're insane. We're not." And so there are frequently military campaigns that collapsed because the Native American warriors were like, "Well, I'm not loyal to your king, and I'm not going to stand out there and get mowed down. I'm not going to die. I'm here for me and survive for my tribe. You guys are insane." And so you see that. So it's really interesting to me. And I do think a lot of that is applicable today, like fighting in confined space of the woodlands. We are in a confined space right here. I got walls around me. You're in a car a lot of times. You're sitting down a lot of times, a lot more than what they did back then, but you're constantly surrounded by structure in modern life. So having something compact that packs a lot of lethality makes a lot of sense. And so again, like the Tomahawk, being able to have something that can stay streamlined to your body and still pack a lot of power, amazing.
So what are some principles that you would recommend to people who might buy some of your tomahawks? What are some principles that you would recommend them use when they train to fight with the tomahawk?
Get our trainers. All right, I would always recommend if you're serious about combative training, get a trainer, because you are learning a new weapon to you, and you want to reduce risk of both your self-injury, and if you're practicing against like a boxing bag or one of those body opponent bags, the torso-less.
Oh,
like,
I'm very familiar with those.
Yeah. Well, you don't want to be using a live blade on that because it'll quickly damage it. So one of the things that we do is we work with Volpe's Training. They're in upstate New York, but they make tomahawk trainers for us that actually weigh very close to the live blade. So I'm not going to tell you how to fight with a tomahawk. We are working on a combatives course specifically for the Empress Tomahawk. We have a combative consultant we're working with, and it just takes a long time. Like, we develop the course material. It's just the logistics of like meeting up and filming is expensive and hard to figure out. But what I would recommend is you get the live blade, you get the trainer, and you practice with it. Now, the best text I've seen for tomahawk combatives, let me awkwardly pull this book out. It's by Benjamin Braddock. It's called Combat Applications of the Tactical Tomahawk. And it went out of print, and then it got reprinted by Lulu, and they printed it without his permission, so he's not happy with the formatting. But it's a very good text. The problem I had with every other tomahawk text out on the market is they're focused on the tomahawk in general, right? And then, like for Macklemore, his text, he had 2 volumes on it. He basically used a cold steel trailhawk, right? Well, the cold steel trailhawk has a hammer pole, an axe bit that sticks out pretty far from the handle, and the handle's really long, and it's just very heavy and sluggish. When you look at tomahawk designs, they have such a wide diversity of sizes, shapes, and features. They're kind of like swords. It's like you come out with a book saying, "I'm going to teach you how to sword fight." Well, what type of sword?
What kind of sword?
There's hundreds of swords out there from different cultures and different contexts. And even with the same sword, like a rapier, you can have different schools of like combatives for a specific sword. So it's kind of crazy to me when I see things like, "Hey, how do you fight with a tomahawk?" I know you're asking me that question, but like, to me, it's like, what type of tomahawk, right? Because what's marketed as a tomahawk today, like an RMJ full tank tomahawk that weighs almost 30 ounces, if I have to fight with that boat anchor, I'm going to use a completely different technique than how I would use with the back ripper that weighs under 8 ounces, right? Same with a cold steel trailhawk with a hammer pole. It doesn't even have a spike on the end. Like, that really neuters your capability when you can't do wrapping hook strikes and that sort of thing. So to me, every tomahawk out there, yes, it can serve as a weapon. That's what kind of defines a tomahawk. It's like one-handed light axe that can serve as a weapon, maybe it'll do other things. But it's like, what are the design features? What are its capabilities? How fast can you move and recover from the chop? That sort of thing. If you go too heavy, If that's all you got, that's all you can afford, and you can't modify it down to a lightweight, then yeah, I would recommend this text. Macklemore's Fighting Tomahawk. If you're going to fight with a cold steel Trailhawk, that's probably the best text out there. If you're going to fight with a spike Tomahawk, which may be heavy or heavier, and it's got straight spike, combat applications with the tactical Tomahawk is definitely the text I'd recommend. And so for us, when we look at our products, like each one of these Tomahawks is so different from each other. The combative methods are going to be different. You know what I'm saying? So it'd be like the combatives course we're coming up with for the Empress Tomahawk. It deals a lot with modern confined space fighting. Like there's tucking the head of the Tomahawk into your shoulder pocket and putting your fists up to make a bone cage here, protecting your temples, and then you can pop it out really fast. It's lots of intercepting fists with the pommel, doing quick chops and snapping back and keeping it high ready. And if you got to throw it, you throw it from the same posture, right? And you have this defensive bone cage and the footwork and stance that goes all into it. I can't do in the confined space of my kitchen and tethered to the phone, right? But there's a whole lot that goes to it. You know, the footwork you use and the stance you take and the strikes you do with this, and maybe even what we call combinations, are all going to be different for different Tomahawk designs, even in one company's set of Tomahawk designs, because each one of them is so distinctive and has different strengths and weaknesses. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And your little demonstration of how you've taken the Tomahawk and tucked it into your shoulder, but you're keeping your hands beside your head. I really like that a lot, because what I see a lot of people doing is they will put their hands forward like an actual fighting stance, which of course, as you're aware of, that's the best way to get your hands hit and you lose the fight because you lose your weapon.
Or in stick fighting, there's a lot of open stances too. Like there's different ways of stick fighting. Like we're going back to Filipino martial arts. There's sort of duelist stance, right? A duel, like two opponents facing off in open space, and that is very good. That could happen, right? And it happens a lot in martial arts studios, right? That's often a lot of cool techniques can be shown, but in reality, you may not have the space for that. And so, you know, defending your weapon from a weapon grab, like a handle grab, tucking it into your shoulder, creating that bone cage to protect the sides of your neck. There's big arteries like behind the collarbone as well you want to protect. And it kind of hides the tomahawk some. Like it's not obvious how far of reach you have when you have that. I don't want to hit the phone. That would be embarrassing.
Well, bam.
That was close. Yeah. You know, I had to do this slowly. Okay. But it's really a blur. You can even transition to meat hooking.
Yeah, that's very fast. That's
and
really
you can
fast.
even throw very quickly. I've clocked it over 30 feet a second, just pulling it here and then releasing. And it goes end over end, of course. And the Empress, again, it can be thrown, but other tomahawks are far more optimized than the throw, especially the Sparrowhawk. That thing's insane. Like this has over 90% chance of sticking, of doing a deeply damaging thing to target, right? So I'm a big fan of that sort of pugilistic stance that we're developing in our Empress Tomahawk combatives course. And I don't know for sure, because my combatives consultant, he's got, Empress Tomahawk, we've been working together through the material. I'm not sure how much of that will translate to, say, the back ripper, or the Stingray or the Sparrowhawk. I just don't know until he sort of stress tests it. Because I don't claim to be an expert in combatives. It's just like, hey, when you have a design, how do you exploit that design in the context of modern combatives the most effectively? And so, for instance, our Thumper War Club, right? There's no rearward spike. You can safely park this over the shoulder, right? To build up, you sort of like pre-cocked the swing, right?
Yeah, and you've got the leverage of putting it on top of your shoulder.
Oh, yeah. But you do that with a spike tomahawk,
Yeah, you're gonna get spiked in the back.
you'd have a scar that maybe the back hair couldn't cover, right? So each weapon has its own strengths and things it's optimized for that will define the footwork and the techniques you use with it. I hope this makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And what I really like you're putting together is you're not trying to make this necessarily, from what it seems like to me, how to say this, you're not trying to make it a modern martial art as far as like Taekwondo or Filipino martial arts are, because you're really seem to be designing this for actual combat, and I really like that and appreciate it, because I come from a big Taekwondo karate background, and a lot of the training that I do right now is very combat based. It's not we're gonna punch each other around and kick each other around with pads, although we do that sometimes. It's very combat based. It's very, okay, there's a threat, I'm going to deal with the threat immediately. And I really like that about yours, because you're not worried about getting into a duel type environment, which I think a lot of people mistake actual fighting and combat for. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the martial arts culture in our, especially our country right now. And I really like how you're getting away from that, and you're focusing just on, okay, how are you going to use this tool to defend your life? And you're not worried about a duel situation. It's just, there's a threat. I'm going to neutralize the threat, and then the fight's going to be done, and it's going to happen like that.
Yeah. And also that gets into, like, it's got to be, I guess there's a term, is it, they call it kill chain, kind of like, what's the whole kill chain like? It's like, okay, I don't want to use the word kill, because hopefully you don't have to, right? Hopefully wound chain or intimidate chain.
Really badly wound. Because if you have to use a tomahawk, it's going to mess them up so bad.
How do you determine that suddenly you need a tomahawk to save your life, right? So that's the first thing, is sort of like, how do you get into that situation in the first place? How do you access your weapon? How do you, depending on how close the threat is, that could foul up your draw of the weapon. How are you wearing it on you? All those things have to be thought through. And so, the reality of it, it's probably going to be a confined space environment, right? You're not going to have an easy means of running away, right? Because if you could run, you would.
And you should,
right?
you probably
Unless
should.
You are terrible at running, right? And then by the time they catch up with you, you're just out of breath. Right. It really just thinking through the whole chain of events, instead of sort of the what you see in a lot of those combative texts. It's like you have these two people standing there, and they're like facing off, like it's like one of those video fighting games, Mortal Kombat
Street Fighter
like
or something like that.
Suddenly you're in this situation where you have your weapon in hand, and they have their weapon in hand, and you have this nice little space distance apart. It doesn't happen that way. So we tried to focus on that in our course development. I would love to know if folks in your audience would be interested in the course, because it's one of those things where we're like, gosh, the logistics of figuring it out, it's very expensive to film and do that sort of stuff. So it's not that we're having second thoughts about it, but we want to really make sure, if we go to the trouble of filming it, that people are going to be interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing, you never know. Like when you come up with any new product or course material or anything, you have no idea how it's going to be received. But I think the biggie for tomahawks, the big takeaway, no matter what, like compared to knives, a tomahawk, like the whole area of the body is opened up as a target. Like it does not matter if it is flesh or bone. Like in a way, impact weapons try to seek bony surfaces, right? Because the energy of the impact is dissipated too much if it hits the flabby bits, right? Because tissue is so good at absorbing shock, right? Knives are targeting not the bone. Usually most knives can't do that well. So I think that's the biggie, is like when you compare, you look at impact weapons, like if it's a sap, a baton, a brass knuckles, or in this case, a war club, it has to target bony areas, right? That's what an impact weapon is best at, because you dissipate so much energy against the soft parts of the body. Whereas a knife is usually targeting the soft parts of the body. It doesn't do well against bone. But a tomahawk does not care. Like anything you hit with the chopping blade or the spike it's going to bury. And with our tomahawks, we've done the testing. It doesn't take a whole lot of like putting your body weight into the blow. We've had customers bury back ripper chopping blades into feral hog heads with just arm motion alone in awkward stances, just like backswinging it, popping it in the head on the ground. It takes so little force to do that. You were mentioning like you're surprised that you decapitated that deer carcass with like a giant pocket knife, right? You'll be amazed how efficient these blades are, right? And so you need a really big knife if you're going to target bony areas, like something like that big old hickory, like a machete type thing.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
most
yeah. So you
self-defense
essentially have to have a
knives-
sword.
Yeah, most self-defense knives are like 8 inches or less, right? You're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to target the soft areas. So I really think when you have a tomahawk for self-defense, it opens everything up. In a way, it can end a fight faster, less lethally than a knife. Like the knife, if you're actually going to have to stop the opponent, that could require stabbing them so many times that they exsanguinate, which takes a long time.
Yeah.
Versus like this to the forearm. Like if their arm is broken, right, because of this, they will live. They won't be happy. You'll be happier that you didn't have to kill anybody, right? So there are things you can do with the tomahawk, aiming for like the knees or the arms, the extremities, that can end a fight rapidly, like instantly in one hit, without having to take it lethally. You know,
because the injuries that tomahawk can deliver is just so much more lethal, and so much more. You could do a lot more damage with the tomahawk.
But it's also shallow too when you think about it. Like this isn't even 2 inches, right?
Yeah.
And yet, so it's very limited in its penetration depth, right? Yet the wrist, the forearm, if you blow this 2 inches in, the arm is not going to be able to continue threatening you, gripping a weapon, that sort of
Absolutely.
thing. So, yeah. And of course, a hit to the head, you know, the brain is definitely in there. And also you got the shock and stuff. But it's really interesting. But yeah, you know, we're investigating other things like throwing. Like that's the thing where like historically you read, like you'll be surprised. I was surprised by how often they were thrown. We're looking into that as well. It's like, okay, in modern context, why would you throw a tomahawk if it's your only weapon? Well, it isn't your only weapon. You're carrying multiple things. But if you don't have access to a handgun, you can't legally carry one. One of the things that we want to explore is like the feasibility of throwing at a tomahawk at an opponent. You know, that sounds crazy. We got to stress test it. But, you know, we certainly aren't going to come out with a combative course anytime soon for that. But, you know, if you got reach with a tomahawk, range is better than reach, right? And the other thing I've noticed is when you're throwing a tomahawk, because you have more standoff, you can actually power up and put more of your body weight into the throw. And the throw is actually more powerful on impact than the blow. Like the blow is connected to your arm's decelerating. You're also in close quarters, you're not going to overcommit to the blow because that would leave you exposed. So that's one of the interesting things, just throwing recreationally these things. You're seeing what it does to target. It's imparting way more impact momentum than just a chop into a target. It's interesting. So there's lots of things to discover. There may be reasons why historically they fought the way they did, right? Throwing at first opportunity and then closing in with a tomahawk to finish. Okay.
Let's do the last two future products if you want to share that, and where you're seeing Wingard Wearables going in the future.
Okay, we went to Blade Show this year. And let me tell you what sells hot. Small fixed blade knives, right?
Really?
Well, yes. Yeah, that's the new hotness. What do you think it would be?
I didn't know. I'm not really enough in the blade world right now to kind of know what's going on.
So my first blade anything design I had was like 2012. I had this idea for a short fixed blade knife. Like it was kind of inspired by those OSS lapel daggers, thumb daggers. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
Yes.
And so I roughed out some prototypes, and I worked with a local knife maker and got one made. And I was like happy with it in some respects and not others. So I've been having small EDC fixed blades on the brain for years. But, when I was at Blade, it's like, that's definitely the trend we heard was like small EDC fixed blades. And it takes a special kind of person to EDC a big knife, even though this is entirely comfortable and feasible to carry. Most people look at a knife that's almost a foot long and they just can't see incorporating that in their daily life. But a small fixed blade, they can. And so we do have a small fixed blade design in the works that I'm just really excited about. It's very unique looking. It's going to be unlike anything else out there. So I'm real excited about that. I just don't know how long it's going to take because we got the prototype, refining it, and then figuring out the production process is always the biggie. I mean, that could change how the prototype comes together. So small EDC fixed blades is one topic. The other is we're looking at other tomahawk designs like hammer pull tomahawks. Like there are people that, as much as I love spike tomahawks and I think they're amazing for utility and bushcraft combatives, there are people that don't like the spike. Like they're either very concerned about self-injury, even if
getting poked.
Or they are, they see value in a hammer pull, really strong value. And so we have some hammer pull concepts that we're exploring as well. But yeah, as far as like where we want to take Wingard Wearables, we want every American to have a Wingard Wearables, but we're a nano-sized business, so scaling up is difficult. And so that's what we're trying to figure out is how to make some of our products more accessible. Like right now we're sold out of like a third of our product lines, right? Because we're making small batches, they sell out and we can't keep up on some of the product lines. Others, we have a few in stock. So we definitely want to look ahead at like future products being more scalable and also figuring out like whether our current product lines, like, back rippers, people have been asking how to get on the list and that sort of thing. And it's like, man, we only come out with a batch every couple of months, right? Hand forged, that's tough to do. We work with blacksmiths and other metal finishers and that sort of thing, but it's always challenging to scale up. So what we want to figure out for the future is like small EDC fixed blades. We're starting to touch into opening, closing knives. Like as much as I don't rely on those as my self-defense, they are extremely handy. Right. As a mechanical engineer, I love opening and closing knives, whether they're fold out or out the front. So I've been starting to, out the front is just.
Those things are so much fun to play with.
Oh yeah. Or gravity based, just sling it out. So I've been like focused on like figuring out what we should tackle first. We've got a bunch of like concepts that, you really got really be tight on your tolerances and manufacturing methods to make an opening closing knife work. I think that's sort of the ultimate challenge to me is like, okay, fixed blades are great, tomahawks are great, but an opening closing knife as a mechanical engineer, and as one who has collected pocket knives and used pocket knives all my life, I'm like, I would like to figure out how to make an opening closing knife that is a Wingard Wearables unique design. Everything we do, if the capability is already addressed in the market, we don't do it, right? EDC Tomahawks, right? No one thought about
Nobody does that.
And so we kind of created our demand. It was swimming upstream, right? The niches of the niche, right? EDC War Club, same thing. Big scalping knife you can carry in your pants, another thing, But it's like small fixed blades, that is a need that's been met, right? So how do you make a small fixed blade that is still unique, has unique capabilities? That's hard. Opening, closing knives, that's hard. Like especially how saturated the market is. And so it's like, how do you, if your brand's strengths are in its unique designs, how do you step into these spaces where there are a whole lot more people that think they have their needs met and deliver something they hadn't even imagined, right, that they needed, right? That's tough to do with knives, especially the smaller the knife it gets because it is just so saturated. So that's where we're hoping to go, is smaller knives and continuing with tomahawks and some different design spaces we hadn't explored before. That's where we're hoping to take it.
Okay. Do you think you'll ever do some sort of a non-EDC wearable tomahawk?
Oh, you mean like a big tomahawk?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone one that's that I know yours are. I know your tomahawk designs are small and more historically correct than let's say this one. But would you ever consider doing one that's not intended for EDC?
Yeah, but we wouldn't do one that's like a historic reproduction, because that to me, like I really have a lot of respect for like my mentor who passed away, Jack Vargo, like people that make historic reproductions. Why would I want to make their life harder by being their competitor? Right. So we do have ideas for like bigger tomahawks, right? That you can't EDC, but then it's like, do we launch that under Wingard Wearables, or do we come up with other products that are not wearable as well and have a new brand, right? I don't know, like an outdoor company type brand. We don't know that. That's like decisions that you gotta make that you don't broadcast on the interwebs. Those are like business moves you make in silence.
Definitely.
Until, because you might fail and that'd be embarrassing, right? You want to pop out with a success.
At the risk of violating what you just said, do you think you'd ever come out with like a bushcrafting tomahawk or a bushcrafting camp hatchet or something like that?
This guy is awesome for bushcraft. I mean, you can like bury that spike into the ground, pry open a hole, use the flat sides to like hammer stakes into the ground, that sort of thing. So it depends on what you mean. Like when you think of a bushcrafting tomahawk, do you think it's bigger and heavier, or like what? Like
something. Yeah, a couple of. So we obviously have my modified Trailhawk here.
Yeah.
The one that I affixed to an actual handle. So something in between the sizes of these two. This is a boy's axe that I modified the head and put it on the handle. So
I think I can't show you it because it would violate, because we don't know how long it will take for us to get this thing. We have a design.
Okay.
A hammer pole design that's close one. A hammer pole design that's kind of inspired by the Missouri war axe. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
Yeah.
So it's almost almost rounded, big triangular chopping blade, and those didn't have hammer poles on them, but we wanted to add a concentrated hammer pole and then keeps the sides flat. So you have the option of a concentrated hammer face and then the flat sides for like driving a green stake into the ground. You don't want a concentrated hammer pole hitting a green wooden stake into the ground. You want to distribute that. I just revealed everything, but whatever. So
you heard it first here.
Heard it first here. It'll be like 5 years till it ever comes out.
Oh, okay.
So, who knows? It just takes forever for us to get these things out.
So I have one more question for you now. A lot of my viewers and subscribers are historical reenactors. A lot of frontier muzzleloading guys. What would you obviously have a huge amount of expertise and knowledge about the historical tomahawk. What would you want to say to to a group of frontier historical reenactors that might help them be more historically correct with their tomahawk selection, usage, mentality when they carry it?
I would like to see the reenactor crowd focus on tomahawks where the head and handle weighs well under a pound. Whatever it is, if it's a hammer pole or poleless or spike tomahawk, the historic versions were almost always under a pound. They often were way less than that. If you look at historic belt axes, they call them belt axes, sometimes bag axes. I mean, some of those are just like under 10 inches long, and the head is like smaller than my 3 fingers put together.
They're tiny.
And that was what they were used to break down deer. Now, those weren't necessarily weapons first, like a tomahawk. But yeah, if you were to, look into tomahawks, for part of your kit, I would recommend looking at, you can modify cold steel tomahawks, but you got to remove a lot of metal. But Track of the Wolf has some unheat treated cast heads, like their rifleman's belt axe. That's pretty promising starting point. If you modify that, it can heat treat it. Because that, I think, weighs with handle around 12 ounces to start
Okay.
with, so you can remove some material and get it lighter. And also Vaughn tools, they're like a mass manufacturer, like in every Lowe's or Home Depot. They make an oyster hatchet that I have my eye on modifying. I think the oyster hatchet could potentially be a good platform. I got to test that. So that weighs very little. So those are my recommendations, is like have fun, do chop and mods of low expense American or foreign made tomahawks that already are light, right? It may not even be a tomahawk. Like an oyster hatchet is an oyster hatchet, but with enough work, you could make it look and feel and handle like a tomahawk. I would also advise against a lot of the taper drop through the top handles, like a friction fit.
That's one thing I've wondered about, is how historically correct are those? Because
That was done.
I've got one of those right here.
Yeah,
Cold steel,
and so
obviously.
those were done primarily to save money, because you would ship the heads that were made in Europe overseas, and you didn't have to ship the handles. So it would be the burden of the customer, which is why they're done today too. You get a bunch of tomahawk heads made in Taiwan. You don't pay for shipping, and you don't pay for the pain of hanging the tomahawk handle with a wedge, because that takes a lot more attention to detail. Cold steel just throws it on. You got a set screw on it. It's kind of wobbly. Yeah, but they're just trying to put in, and they are great products. I love cold steel, but they have to save money somewhere, so that they put together a tomahawk they can sell as a tomahawk assembled. That's the minimum viable tomahawk, right? The head's wobbly, the edge is like not sharp usually. But that's fine. You paid not top dollar for it. You know what you're getting. You're going to modify it into something great. And I know you modified yours to be hanged with a wedge as well.
Right? I did.
And that's definitely, I think that's great. So the taper drop to the top is a thing. It's just that wedging was a lot more common, especially with spike tomahawks. But there's just a diversity of designs out there. That's the other thing. It's just like, I mean, they had all metal tomahawks on the Frontier. Like, just
really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, kind of like a fireplace poker. You had just a thin wrought iron handle and wrought iron blade and steeled edge. You know,
were they made all in one piece except for the bit?
Everything was one piece, right? Supposedly, Daniel Boone had one of these one-piece throwing tomahawks. Right, and they were always spike tomahawks, and sometimes they had a point on the front too, and they almost always had a pointed handle, and they're always short because they're all metal, right? You don't want a long one because it's too heavy. But I mean, they've had tomahawks that had langets on them, like, you know, straps of iron going down that were pinned to the handle. So the diversity of designs of how they had to make tomahawks on the Frontier with whatever scrap metal they had was incredible. And so you can really go wild if you're a reenactor. If you actually look through all the historic spike tomahawks, if you look up some of our videos where we showcase some of the unique examples, like discussing, like one of the videos y'all should check out is probably what makes a tomahawk a tomahawk.
I've watched that one. That's a really
amazing examples where it's like, really? That's how they made that? Really? Like, it was like threading on the head on a halberd handle, and like, oh man, they did some crazy stuff. And you can do that with your own. If you're a reenactor, there are examples that you can look at and reproduce. They're incredibly complex in construction, far more complex than taper drop to the top, with their own unique benefits. So I think it's just a rich topic. It's amazing how diverse the designs are, especially with spike tomahawks. It's just never ending how many, like, it seems like every few months I'll see an example of like, wow, I didn't know you could do that. Like, some of them were like spike tomahawks that had two spikes coming off. I saw one the other day. It had a long straight spike, a curled spike, a chopping bit, and then it was smokable. It was like, well, where's the pipe? Where's
That's
the
super
pipe
cool.
hole? And it looks like you inserted a clay pipe on the tip.
Oh, wow.
And smoked it. And there's even a picture of Corn Planter he was a Seneca War Party chief, and he is painted, a picture of painting. He is holding a spontoon tomahawk with a spike on it, and it's got a clay pipe bolt coming out.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like, wow. So that was a real thing. I thought that was just some European painter just painting rubbish. Like he was just like, okay, I only have a few hours to paint this guy, and he left. What does tomahawk look like? Oh, he said it could smoke. I'll just tack on a pipe bowl on it. Well, no, that existed. And so it's
amazing.
just, it's incredible what you find.
Hmm.
They really did. They implemented every creative solution you could think of for unique capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
Well,
it's been great talking. I don't know if you had any other questions. We can keep going.
Yeah, there's just to tack on to the reenacting question before we wrap up here. I'm sure you're familiar with Simeon England.
Yes, incredible work.
Yeah, so that was going to be my question. What do you think about his work?
Incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. Like he's probably the let's see, did he have the one with like the brass Bowie knife inlaid into the chopping blade? Was that one he made?
I saw a pipe hawk that he's done recently. I don't think it was brass, but it was silver or German silver that was like a Bowie knife or a trade knife that was inlaid into the blade.
His work's incredible. I've never had a chance to meet him. I'm trying to remember if I've even messaged him. Mm-hmm. Obviously, his work must cost a lot of money.
They start around $350, I think, for the bare bones basic pole hawk.
Yeah, and so like I have a spontoon pipe tomahawk my mentor made in the early 2000s. Pipe tomahawk, smokable, $1,200 in the year 2000. So what is that after 24 years? Now I feel
$2,000 or more.
Yeah. So pipe tomahawks, to me, I would love to make a pipe tomahawk at some point. And we had an idea. We called it the lung ripper. We wanted a tomahawk that you could smoke that had a spike still on it. That was something that we have put on the back burner because it's like, it is very niche, right? And so you gotta we think we're going to get to that, but it's like you got to focus on something that's going to help your business grow faster, earlier on. And we definitely done a lot of very niche things. I think we got 7 thumpers left, and then we're going to stop making them because wearable war clubs are not amazing that we live in such a boring world. They aren't hot sellers, right? So we are going to come out with a different version of a wearable war club in the future, but those took a lot longer to sell than we thought, Yeah,
I thought when I saw those, I was like, oh, that's so kind of like the tomahawk. It's like, oh my goodness, why didn't I think of that? Yeah, I thought that was the coolest thing. It's like, why would more people not want that?
Yeah, and I didn't come up with it. I didn't think it was possible. Like a Native American artist came up with this.
Really?
Sent us a prototype. He bought a back ripper and liked it, Ernest Gendron. And he makes war clubs in a traditional way. And he came up with an EDC war club, and he sent us a prototype. And he gets, a little bit of royalty for every sale because he's the designer.
Like, what's that in your waistband? Oh, just a Native American war club. Oh,
yeah. Oh, yeah. But anyway, the future is abundant. And the opportunities out there, the design space is just infinite on tomahawks, on wearable war clubs. But the demand from the market is very, very finite. And so it's like figuring out what you do for your business to do best for yourself, for your family, and how you grow. That's always a challenge in a small business. Yeah. So, but for the near term, small fixed blades.
You have seen the future, and the future is tomahawks.
Is tomahawks, but small fixed blades we got to make.
Small fixed blade knives. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Zach. Where can people find you?
WingardWearables.com. And we're on Instagram and on YouTube, especially link to our YouTube if you can, because our YouTube is about the only thing that's growing. If you've seen social media these days.
Yeah, so you've been doing a great job with the YouTube game.
Thank you. We're hoping to get better at it. We're hoping to do a video about historic thrown tomahawks soon. So like throwing accounts and stuff in history. So it'll be fun. But thank you very much, Drake. And I hope you and the family have a great time in North Texas.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, Zach. Really appreciate it.
And how do I leave here without hindering your ability to save and upload this?
Hang on.
Well, that wraps up our conversation with Zach Wingard. Again, thank you so much to Zach for his time and sharing his expertise. I got a lot out of this conversation and have been inspired to dive back into the historical references and do my own research about tomahawks on the frontier. Hopefully you have been inspired to look further into tomahawks, whether it's for historical research or perhaps even if you want to learn some of the martial arts surrounding tomahawk usage. Everyone, thank you so much for watching, and remember to check out Wingard Wearables Instagram and YouTube pages and support Zach's superb work by purchasing one of his fine tools or tomahawks for yourself. Like, comment, and subscribe to Flintlock Operator as well. We have some fantastic content coming very soon, so be sure to ring that notification bell so you can be kept up to date on all our frontier adventures. Everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a fantastic day.